Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Yvonne Brannon. I am Chair of Public Schools First NC. Tonight, we're going to be talking about House Senate Bill 49, the Parents' Bill of Rights, and we're going to have a short discussion on that. Our guest tonight was going to be the Executive Director for Equality NC, and unfortunately, they're not going to be able to join us. But we will, do our best to present the information. We'll also take some questions at the end. And if there are other things that we need to follow up with you ourselves or through Equality NC, we will let you know. So I'm going to go ahead and next slide. Okay, so just in case later, something that we say tonight piques your interest, feel free to follow up with Equality NC as well as us. They are doing an outstanding job of trying to provide information to the public about this bill and their views on the bill. Also joining me tonight, I have Heather Coons. Heather, yay. Heather's our Communication Director of Public Schools First NC, and very happy to have Lynn Edmonds, who has been tracking this bill very closely. Lynn is our Outreach and Engagement Director. So I'm going to let them take it away now, and we will save your questions if you don't mind until the end, and we'll try to address every single one of them.
So I'm going to kick us off with a little bit of background on the bill. So this bill, Senate Bill 49, which is called the Parents' Bill of Rights, is essentially the same as House Bill 755 from last year's short session. That bill was guaranteed to be vetoed by Governor Cooper, thankfully, and because the proponents didn't have the votes needed to override a veto, it never made it through both houses. But now that there is a supermajority in the Senate that can override Governor Cooper's veto and only one member standing in the way of a veto override in the House, the proponents of the bill think that this one has a good chance of making it into law. So it was introduced on January 31st, and it moved very quickly, in my opinion. In just 1 week, it was heard and discussed and passed by the Senate. And the Senate vote took place on February 7th. And the same day, it passed a first reading in the House, and it was then referred to the Rules, Calendar, and Operations of the House. So since February 7th, there hasn't been any public action on the bill, but things might be happening behind the scenes. So we hope that no more action will take place on this bill and it dies in committee, but we really doubt that that will be the case, but we can still hope. So anyway, no public action since February 7th after rocketing through the Senate and then into the House. So getting into the content, as the slide shows, so broadly speaking, I'm going to just go over and give you examples of the kinds of things that are in this bill, and then I'm going to give you some examples of what's in an alternative set of bills that has been introduced. So the two categories here are the rights of the parents and then school staff requirements, restrictions, and penalties. I should say that a lot of the parts of this bill that are labeled the rights of parents are actually the right to prohibit. So they're affirmative, and then there are just these prohibitions that the parents can assert. So in the bill uses the term remedy instead of school penalties, but we're using the word penalty. Excuse me. In here because it really describes the content a little bit better. Their penalties proposed for the schools. So the rights of parents include these general policy statements, a couple of them, such as parents have the right to direct the education and care of his or her child, and also that parents have the right to direct the upbringing and moral or religious training of his or her child. So broad, things people aren't going to argue with. They're general statements. There's nothing specific there. They're just general policy guidelines. But the most prominent portion of the bill and of the parental rights are already part of state or federal law. The vast majority of what's in this bill already exists. And in many cases, the applicable law is listed right in the bill. So for example, we have that parents have the right to access and review all education records as authorized by the Federal Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. And we all know that educators are very familiar with that as FERPA. So the bill is basically saying something that we already know is true based on FERPA. So another example is a parent's right. So I pulled out a couple of ones that I thought were pretty extreme here. So another is a parent's right to prohibit the creation, sharing, or storage of a biometric scan without prior written permission except as authorized by a court order or by law enforcement, so in the case of a criminal proceeding. And biometric scans include things like facial recognition and retina scans, things that schools are probably not doing already, but it's in this bill. And then here's another one of my favorites. Parents have the right to prohibit the creation, sharing, or storage of his or her child's blood or DNA without the parent's prior written consent. Again, except as authorized by a court order or part of something required by law. And then here they include the statute related to this. So both of these are squarely under FERPA regulations. They're already not permitted. But parents who don't know that these fall under FERPA and are already permitted may be confused, and maybe they'll be concerned that maybe schools are already doing these things. So this may just be part of a fear strategy that's happening with this bill, but they're already prohibited under FERPA. So, and then this bill already includes some newly proposed and very specific parental rights. So I'm going to start with the second bullet here. It's the right for students to participate in protected student surveys only with parental consent. And I want to point out that parental consent is already required for students to participate in protected student surveys. But currently, consent is in an opt-out basis, so the parent has to opt out of the survey. So this bill changes the language to an opt-in, so parents have to explicitly give permission. And then we have another new parental right, which is to review all available records of materials their child has borrowed from a school library. So as you might expect, we have some concerns about this, this new piece of this legislation and this breach of student privacy, that the student can't feel secure in knowing that what they check out of the library might be private. So then we have the other category, which is school staff requirements, restrictions, and penalties or remedies. So like the parental rights, many of the school staff requirements are already part of state or federal law, or they're common practice in public schools. People who aren't aware of that might think some of these things are happening in public schools and not already prohibited, but most of them are. So, however, we can't speak for what's happening in private schools. And it's worth pointing out multiple times that this bill does not apply to any of the schools receiving funds, private schools receiving funds through the North Carolina vouchers. But some of the provisions of the bill requires schools to provide parental information regarding requirements for promotion to the next grade. We all know that schools already do this. They're required to do this, and they all do it. They all provide qualifications of a child's teachers, including licensure status. Again, maybe not in private schools, but certainly in all public schools. They provide avenues to promote parental involvement, such as in school advisory councils and PTAs. And I imagine a lot of the school staff and parental or PTA staff or volunteers are already saying, what, we try so hard year in and year out to get parents involved. Why is this in this bill? We're already doing this. We're doing it a lot, but it's there. Maybe anyway. Another one is to establish a means for parents to object to textbooks and supplementary instructional materials. Some of the people going to school board meetings and complaining about textbooks may need to realize that there already is procedures that are required by general statute for means for parents to object to textbooks and supplemental materials. These are already in law. There are newly proposed restrictions, however, and I'm just going to pause. This is one that's gained a lot of publicity. It really limits, it's limiting. the instruction on gender identity, sexual activity, or sexuality in any way in grades kindergarten through 4th grade. Now, this is one of the ways that this bill differs from last year's. This last year's prohibits these activities in kindergarten through grade 3. This one extends it to 4th grade. And it also adds in the definition of curriculum. So here it says it's the standard course of study, support materials, locally developed curriculum, supplemental instruction, and textbooks. And other supplementary, so it really covers it broadly. So you can imagine this as any book that the teacher wants to read to the students. However, it doesn't include responses to student-initiated questions. And proponents of the bill point to this little piece here, these few words, to say, well, students can still ask questions, teachers can still engage in conversation, but there are so many other restrictions that we know that teachers are going to be very cautious about having conversations. And Lynn's going to talk more about this. I do want to point out also that during the question period on this bill in the Senate, one of the main sponsors, who's Senator Galey, she was asked whether there was any evidence that the type of instruction prohibited in the bill had occurred in North Carolina schools. And she said that she had anecdotal evidence that there was a video on Twitter and that there was a video on Twitter, but didn't have any details. So anyway, no clear evidence. So there are newly proposed requirements for schools. And here we have an example here is the governing body of a public school should adopt procedures to notify a parent if, before administration to students in kindergarten through 3rd grade, they have to provide a copy of the student well-being questionnaire or health screening form and provide a way for the parent to consent for the use of the questionnaire. So that's a restriction that's new in here. And then before these were opt-out, now it's opt-in. So that's a shift. Prior to changes in the name or pronoun used for a student in school records or by school personnel, the notice to the parent of the change. This applies for all ages of students up through 18. So also I wanted to add in that in this bill, there's a requirement that school personnel, this is a requirement, school personnel do one or both of the following. They encourage a child to discuss issues related to the child's well-being with his or her parent and facilitate discussion of the issue with the child's parents, except where there's a case that the teacher or staff person believes that the disclosure would result in the child becoming abused or neglected. So there's a lot of gray matter in between there that's not explicitly stated, and Lynn will talk more about concerns about these prohibitions. I can get it, I can say it. So we have some proposed remedies or penalties here that I want to mention as well. So the bill states that the public school has to adopt procedures for parents to notify the principal of concerns related to these school requirements that were just being described that are part of this bill. And also, they must adopt a process for resolving them within 7 days. If they're not resolved within 30 days, a parent has the option of a couple of things. They may notify the State Board of Education and request a parental concern hearing. So they're jumping all the way up to the State Board of Education. And then the State Board of Education must assign a hearing officer. And the hearing officer will collect facts and within 30 days make a recommendation about how to resolve this. But the public school has to pay the cost of the hearing officer. Another option is to bring a legal action against the school. And then if the court decides that the school's actions were in violation of the requirements of this bill, the court can order the school to pay the parents' attorney fees. So there's some pieces in here that will cause schools a lot of pause in terms of their communication with students when they have this concern that these remedies or penalties will follow. So actually, we need to talk about another option to address parent and student rights. Senate Bill 74 and House Bill 58 are identical, and they were both introduced on February 6th. And they passed the first reading, and then they were referred to the Committee on Rules and Operations of the Senate. So they've been resting there since February 7th also. So we hope these ones move. They're very short. They are focused on rights, not rights to prohibit, but real rights. They include parent rights and student rights, which are very important. So I just want to say again, we think that private schools receiving funds through vouchers should also abide by these rights. In these bills, like I said, there aren't restrictions or penalties included. They're just basic rights that parents and students should have when they're interacting with schools. They do overlap in some cases with rights that are in Senate Bill 49 that already fall under current law. So for example, the bills also include the right to access and review all education records as authorized by FERPA. And the bills also say that the parents have rights to make all healthcare decisions for his or her child unless otherwise provided by law. So that really encompasses a lot of the things that are in the other bill as well. But the parents' rights section also includes things that are nowhere to be found in Senate Bill 49, and they really should be, because these are rights that we all need to have regarding our child's education. So for example, it includes the right of parents to have a fully resourced classroom with the tools and technology to deliver curriculum requirements as required by the North Carolina Constitution. This is a really solid right. We should have this. And it also has the right to be able to sit in his or her child's class as long as it's within reasonable limits that are set by the local school administrative unit. So very reasonable. So there are 10 parental rights listed, and the student section has 14 rights. So SB 49 doesn't have any student rights. These rights are, again, the student rights they're broadly stated that should be, and in many, many cases already are in place for students. But given the current climate right now, they are important to state explicitly. So a couple of examples, they include things like the student's right to feeling safe and comfortable at school, including sufficient protections and resources for the public school and school unit, including physical and mental protections for students and staff. And also the student has a right to a learning environment in which discrimination in all forms is not tolerated by the school or school administration, police or security personnel or other students. So as I said, we really hope that this bill or these bills move forward this session, that they come out of committee. They're clear and they're solid rights. So I'm going to turn it over to Lynn to pick up and share some of our concerns that we have with SB 49 or reiterate.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we share these concerns as one of our partner organizations, Equality NC. As Heather pointed out, it's important for the public to understand that according to our analysis, it is going to apply to traditional public schools and charter schools. So often bills that apply to our traditional public schools do not apply to charter schools, but this one does, in the way that we understand it. And as Heather pointed out, it does not apply to private schools that are receiving taxpayer dollars through the private vouchers offered in our state. Our main concerns as a public education advocacy group and organization is we believe that this could worsen the number of teachers that are currently teaching, leaving the profession, that they may feel very strongly that they want to protect and be advocates and allies of our LGBTQ students. And they may feel that this just burdens them in that way, and that they won't be able to fill that role in the care and education of their students. And so that may be reason to leave. They may leave because it is just another added burden and challenge for them on top of so many other challenges facing North Carolina teachers right now. And then we also believe that it would further erode our teacher pipeline. So as it stands, our teacher pipeline in North Carolina is very anemic and is in crisis. We don't have as many students as we need going into the teaching profession, and we believe that this bill makes the teaching profession even less appealing and would do further damage to the pipeline. And then also our concern is that parents who may be opposed to this type of legislation and these types of restrictions might opt out of our public schools, which we believe is very tragic. In some cases, parents, for example, with calendar flexibility, parents will opt into charter schools because charter schools have more freedom with their calendar or with their hours, things of that nature. But in this case, with this bill also applying to charters, parents may seek, homeschooling options or private school options if they feel that this is just too damaging for our public school classrooms, and that's a real concern for us. And I just want to check. So before we go to the take action, I'm going to leave this here on the screen right now. I think it's okay for us to open it up for questions. And Yvonne, do you see any? I'm going to check the chat as well.
No, but we have such a small audience tonight. I would like you to feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, make your comment. If you want to raise your hand, that's okay. If you want to just speak and introduce yourself and make your comment or ask your question, we welcome it.
My name is Lee A. Williams II. I go by the pronouns he, him, and his. I actually serve as the Chief Equity Officer for Orange County Schools. I really appreciate you all hosting this forum. My team and I are completely frustrated, flabbergasted, disgusted, and every other word you can think of regarding this bill. We have just had a gender policy done in our district that would support our students, support their rights, and support their rights to be in schools and be safe. It looks as if we'll have to redo that policy. Is that accurate, right? If this bill passes, which it looks like it's on the fast track too, we'll have to redo our gender policy where it does allow for name change and it does allow for that support for students. Is that correct?
Yes.
Ridiculous.
There's nothing more blunt than yes, because it will be a statute, it'll be a state law. And
I was just hoping you would say no. It was just my last ditch effort hoping you said no.
Supersede.
Yeah.
We're not attorneys.
Right. I was going to say, Yvonne, we need to make that caveat that we are not attorneys. But I imagine that school boards across the state will be quickly meeting with their own, board attorneys and legal professionals to find out how, if there's a way to mitigate the damages here. And thank you for raising that point. It's really good to hear from you. Thank you.
Just going to jump in and ask a question. And I absolutely agree with the last gentleman. I was a former administrator and counselor for students at risk and families at risk in a different state. And this would have just been, we wouldn't have been able to function. And I think your supposition that people may flee the public schools for this reason is absolutely correct, based on friends that I've talked to have been complete public school supporters and have their children in the schools and now have said, that's it. So my question is this: have we seen any action coming from groups like the School Boards Association, the Superintendents Association, the state PTO, and the business leaders, they're the ones that are going to have powerful impact versus, a few individuals.
The only thing that I can tell you, Mary, that I know is a group that's been very vocal is the NCAE, the North Carolina Association of Educators. They have come out against this bill for many of the reasons Lynn's already mentioned. They don't want schools to be sued. Teachers are tired of being threatening that they're going to be sued if they teach something wrong or use the wrong pronoun. They see it as a distraction from their job as an educator and those 6 hours they have a day to have extra burdens of notifying parents and getting between a child and a parent and then have meetings about it. And so they see it as very disruptive event. And so I do know I know that the School Board Association is discussing it. And at this point, I have not seen them actively lobbying publicly one way or the other.
I haven't either, Mary. I haven't seen anything from the North Carolina PTA or the Superintendent's Association. Hopefully that'll be coming soon. We need every voice in the choir. Peter, it's good to see you. You want to chime in next?
Sure, thank you. I'm pretty sure that everybody on the Zoom understands or agrees that one of the purposes of the SB 49 is to bring the demise of public education. So your concern that parents may opt out, actually I see as being one of the motivating factors for this being promoted by the Republicans. I just wanted to, two things. I wanted to let people know I'm co-founder of Love Our Children NC, working on ending out-of-school suspensions, not only in New Hanover County where we're based, but throughout the state, and are eager to help any other counties that are looking at doing that. And I guess the question I have for people, understanding you're not lawyers, is how you feel about the difference between the phrase children and all children, or students and all students. And most of the policies that I've seen just either use the word children or more likely use the word students, but don't include the word all. And what concerns me in New Hanover County is that we have a Board of Education that some of the members are doing things in the name of students, but as has already been mentioned, it's not for all students. LGBTQ students are being targeted, special education, marginalized communities, Black and Brown communities are being targeted as well. And I'm just wondering if historically, if there's ever been talk about adding the word all to any legislation to make it clear that it's for all children or all students.
Well, Peter, I like your comments. I don't think that many of the bill writers right now are thinking about being inclusive. I don't think that's their goal. And I think they're very specific. Even in this bill, there are places where it's K3, it's K4, and there may be some components of the K3, K4 that someone could say, okay, I kind of get that. But the conversation all about, which Heather pointed out to me earlier tonight, about the pronouns and these kind of things, is supposedly for all students. It is the all, but it's a sad all, right? Because it calls out children and holds it against them if they use pronouns that make them comfortable or pronouns they identify with. The one thing I will say that's really critical, and Lynn's getting ready to talk about it, is that this has gone very quickly. It passed the Senate with ease. So the House is next. So Lynn, I'm going to stop there and let you talk a little bit about what we need to do next.
Sure. Before I do that, I wanted to ask Heather, there's a question in the chat about, do we know how abuse is being defined? And I don't think we do. I don't think there's language in that bill that clarifies what is meant by the term abuse. And it sounds like this is an educator that says, I know that, I'm quoting, I know that if I'm forced to break confidentiality, that the student may not suffer physical abuse, but in many cases, they will certainly suffer emotional abuse. Yes, absolutely. I mean, we know that for some students, school is their safe place. And for children, whether, you know, and again, that pronoun piece and the quote outing of students applies K-12, all grade levels, all ages. Heather, do you want to say more?
Well, I was just going to say in the bill, it does refer to a section 7B 101. And I did just look that up, and it says, you know, as abuse in it says the meaning, and it says abused juveniles. Most of it is physical. Where I see the term emotional, it says where whose parent, guardian, custodian, or caretaker creates or allows to be created a serious emotional damage to the juvenile. Serious emotional damage is evidenced by a juvenile's severe anxiety, depression, withdrawal, or aggressive behavior toward himself or others. So I don't know if that helps at all in your question, but yeah, it's pretty focused on serious
And
emotional
you know, one other thing
effect in this case.
one other thing I'll add to the analysis of all this is one of the problems. There's a lot of things that are not well defined. It's just like there can be you can be the school, the NCAA pointed out, okay, like if there has to be a hearing within 7 days, if not resolved, then they can go to the Board of Education into
Well, 30
legal action.
days.
So what
Yeah,
does it mean to be resolved?
right.
I mean, you know, how do you resolve a parent and a child's conflict over pronouns or over a book the kid took out of the library on their own without permission per se, right? So there's so much here that is not clear. Now, we have heard one other rumor, and I cannot attest to it. But one of the reasons some folks think that this is held up in committee, and so right now, is because of this unclarity, that there's a concern that there's legal concerns about, you know, suing people, suing school systems, and even school boards don't want to be sued. So I think that that's a good thing for us, that there is some folks that are pushing really hard to have more clear, concise, and informative language. And this whole thing about suing schools and school boards is very serious. So I do think that we'll see some change on that language.
The interesting thing is, you know, people used to say, well, we're going to sue you and you're going to pay for my attorney. I'd say, well, you're going to pay for your attorney and our attorney. You're a taxpayer.
That's
So,
right.
you know, they think that they're suing the school, but, you know, taxpayers understanding what this is going to cost them, even if morally they're not supportive, financially, you know, this could end up being really expensive for schools, and it's coming out of taxpayer dollars and probably local dollars, you know.
That's
That would go somewhere else.
great point, Mary. That's a great point.
People don't understand when they sue the schools, they're suing themselves. You know, in a sense.
So let's talk a little bit about what we can do, which is what you see in front of you now. Look, we are all exhausted at everything, all the attacks that are coming at our public schools. And I know that many of us share concerns about other things like Medicaid expansion, gun bills that are coming through the legislature. There's all kinds of things to be concerned about, right? So it is hard to be an advocate these days, but this has gotten a lot of media attention, but we just need to keep pushing. So our recommendations to you on how you can take action is to be sure that you are talking to your friends and your networks and public school supporters about this bill and why it is concerning. And as Mary pointed out, that's a great point. If they're not with you on the emotional, moral, values that we're concerned about here, then talk to them about, the burden on the financial burden as a taxpayer. Contact your House representative. The reason we pointed out House representative is because, as Heather said, it's done in the Senate. It's over and done with. So we really need to target House members right now. And I don't have an image to show you, but we have a tool on our website under resources, or it might be under take action or engage. I think it's under engage, where you can find your representative. You can also easily find your representative on the General Assembly's website. There's on the homepage of the General Assembly website, there's a tool in the upper right-hand corner that says, find my who represents me, or find my representative. And it's very easy to use. So that's how you find that person. And then support organizations like ours. So Equality NC, their mission and purpose is a little bit different than ours, globally. Meaning in their scope of work, but we are aligned in opposition to this bill, and then support us in our work as we advocate for the public school issue at large. Like again, we are concerned about the teacher pipeline. We are concerned about the burden on teachers, et cetera, and parents leaving the public school system. And we firmly believe at the bottom here, this is in regard to this bill, is that we do believe that all children, regardless of how they identify, that they deserve to see themselves represented and to feel safe and welcome in our public schools.
And I think students are a powerful voice in this, because if not for themselves, they understand for their peers, and their voices around the rate of depression and suicide and the public attention to it now, the connection to this by students with pressure on their parents, or, certainly on, elected officials, they have the right to do that. But I think that's also a powerful conduit. So, I would urge anyone that has children that are on social media to also work with their children, because they're much better than we are sometimes.
Absolutely. And we are, active in the same places. You'll see our social media in just a second, but the same places as Equality NC, and those are both great places to, including Instagram. So those are great places to stay updated and to share content about this bill. We just want to make you aware that this 2023 is our 10-year anniversary. We were founded in 2013. So we are celebrating all year, but our first big event in particular is going to be on May 31st. It's a reception and conversation with Congressman Wiley Nickel. We are still negotiating for our location, and there is a possibility the time could change slightly, but the gist is you can mark your calendar for May 31st, and we'll be sharing details in our newsletter, on social media, all of those places as we develop them. And we want to thank you again. We are so sorry that Equality NC wasn't with us. We know that they are working hard and things happen, but we do regret that they weren't able to be with us tonight. And we support their efforts in this, and we hope that you'll follow their action alerts as well as ours. And this is how you can find us and please sign up for our weekly newsletter. So Heather, our communications director, does a great job writing and developing a weekly e-newsletter that goes out, I think on Saturday, usually on Saturday mornings, but it recaps the week at the General Assembly. And sometimes it's a lot to take in, but we try to get you, we try to keep you rather up to date on education legislation as it's moving through this long session.
And I would just like to add in closing, thank you, Heather and Lynn, for the research on this webinar tonight, for, digging into the bill, for tracking it, for paying attention to what's going on. And I will say one last thing in closing. I do know there's a few advocates that are looking to the possibility that some of this might violate federal law. I have no idea how that, again, we're not attorneys. I have no idea how that might work. But I do think it's an interesting concept about what are our civil and human rights that are protected in federal law. And is there any violation of any of that in some of these current drafts? So that'll also be interesting. And unfortunately, as you may know, we are looking to the federal government, Congress, more and more for ways to protect the civil and human rights of our citizens if they're not protected in the states. So this is going to be interesting. Again, thank you. Someone wants to know, yes, you've already answered it, Lynn. We're going to take care of that. We'll share some information with you. And most importantly, stay tuned. Lynn said that, but we are not done. There'll be more information coming out about this, but I think that Mary has made a great pitch for talking to your neighbors. A lot of people don't know about this bill. They don't understand it. They don't see the problems with it. They just look at, oh, these are young kids, and they don't read the real details of the policy. So I think it's really important that you talk to your friends and neighbors. And I really think Mary's right about this. We've seen in Wake County where students standing up and speaking up can really turn board policies around at the local level, at state level, and the General Assembly. So thank y'all all. Good night. And we hope to be talking to you again soon.
Thank you.